So, ladies and gentlemen, with all of the Boston Marathon madness that occurred last week, we actually did not have time to cover a really, really large story, and that is, of course, the disastrous fertilizer plant explosion in the town of West Texas. West is located, I think, about 20 miles away from Waco, Texas. So far, we know that at least 14 people were killed. There supposedly are still some who are missing. Over 160 people were injured. The blast was so large that not only did it destroy the plant, but it actually destroyed some 50 homes nearby. It destroyed supposedly a nursing home, a school, an apartment complex. Damage was reported in a 37 block area. So that is huge. 37 blocks. That is gigantic. And while 50 homes were supposedly just flattened, over 350 homes actually received some damage from the blast. And you can actually find some really horrific video of the explosion itself on YouTube. There are countless photos of the explosion, the fire, the aftermath. It's all really frightening stuff here. But what's the most frightening thing about it, and the thing that to me is the most maddening about the explosion, is that it appears to have been preventable. Not what caused the initial fire, but reports show that this plant had far more dangerous chemicals on hand than the law actually allows. How much more, you ask? Well, Mike Elk, writing in the Washington Post, reports, quote, the plant had 1,350 times the legally allowed amount of highly explosive ammonium nitrate, yet hadn't informed the Department of Homeland Security of the danger, end quote. You heard me right there, folks. You heard me. 1,350 times the amount of ammonium nitrate. That is a lot. That is a lot of ammonium. That's not 2 times the amount. No, that's not 3 times the amount. No, that's not 10 times the amount. That's not even 100 times the amount allowed. That is 1,350 times the legal amount of a dangerous chemical. Apparently, a company is supposed to report to Homeland Security if they have more than 400 pounds of ammonium nitrate, 400 pounds or more. They had, ladies and gentlemen, not 400 pounds, they had 270 tons. 270 tons. That is, 540,000 pounds. Or 539,600 more pounds past the legal limit. But really, let's think about it though. So there's only 400 pounds. What are regulations good for anyway? Am I right? What are regulations good for? Stupid government getting in the way of the businessman, getting in the way of private industry. What are regulations good for? Well, they're good to keep explosions like this from happening. That's what they're good for. They're good to keep explosions like this from occurring and to minimize the damage when explosions like this do happen. How do they minimize it? Well, let me tell you. Reading from the Washington Post again, quote, the fertilizer plant did not have sprinklers, shut-off valves, fire alarms, or legally required blast walls all of which could have prevented the catastrophic damage done. And there was little chance that regulators would learn about the problems without the company reporting them themselves. Not only had the Occupational Safety and Health Administration not inspected the plant since 1985, but also because of underfunding, OSHA can inspect plants like the one in West Texas on average only once every 129 years. That's right, end quote, 129 years, because they're so underfunded, because they're so understaffed, because of all the cuts that we've given to this regulatory agency, because we've cut the thing down so much, so it had no sprinklers, no shutoff valves, no alarms, no blast walls, and again, it's because of that, and because of underfunding, OSHA had not been there since 1985. What happened? What happened when they were there in 1985, you ask? Well, when it was inspected in 1985, it was found to be in serious violation in the storage of ammonia. And it was found in serious violation, and so this company received a fine. They received a fine. Well, I'm sure it was a strong slap on the wrist, right? A strong slap. How much was the fine, you ask? $30. That's right. The fine that they received in 1985 was 30, not 30,000. No, not 30 million. $30. In fairness, though, that's like what, $60 with inflation today? So look, this blast that wiped out most of a town, it wasn't an accident, is I think the main thing we need to remember here. So the fire that started it, I'm sure was an accident. I'm sure they didn't want to burn the plant down and have it explode. The fire, I'm sure, was an accident. But the overall destruction is the result of the right-wing dream. The vast right-wing dream, the vast right-wing ideology, the get rid of regulations ideology, the defund the regulators so they can't do their job ideology, the ideology that says that if you are in violation, make the penalties so small that they're just a small penny when it comes to the cost of doing business. Hell, most fines businesses can write off on their taxes, so in reality, I would imagine we probably paid for the violations anyway. And look, let's go into a little more, let's talk a little more about the way that we actually regulate. Reading from Mike Elk, this time from In These Times magazine, quote, since 1970, there have been 84 cases prosecuted of willful violation of safety rules that resulted in a worker death. During this time, more than 360,000 workers died on the job. The penalty for wrongfully killing a worker on the job is only 6 months. The maximum penalty for a major safety violation is a mere $7,000. End quote. Again, 360,000 dead, only 84 cases. I'm sure some of them were just accidents, but that's a very, very tiny percentage of a percentage we're talking about here. But again, like Mitt Romney said, corporations are people, my friend. They're people, except when they're responsible for the death of their workers. Well, then they're not people. Then the accountability just flies out the window. $7,000 for a major safety violation. That's the max. Look, over 4,000 people a year die in the workplace here in the U.S. 4,000. How many of those could be prevented? Actually, Greg Mitchell at The Nation magazine talked to Hugh Kaufman, who is a longtime whistleblower who works at the EPA, and he talked about how the company the fertilizer company sent false information to the EPA and the consequences that occurred because of that false information. Actually, the Dallas Morning News wrote, quote, "The company sent false, misleading, and inaccurate information to the EPA in 2011, which led to the first responders being unaware and untrained to safely handle the situation," end quote. So here's the deal. It's not only the fact that this company had these chemicals. It's not the fact that they had these chemicals and that were illegal. It's not that they didn't have the proper safety mechanisms to prevent the blast from getting gigantic and large. It's not that. It's also the fact that they, in fact, failed to report it properly or lied in reporting it. The fact that they did that most likely cost many first responders their lives. And look, just so you know, just for your information, West Texas, the town of West Texas, actually does not have a professional fire department. They have a volunteer fire department. And I'm not saying this, let me be clear, I'm not saying this to disparage the volunteer fire department or first responders, or any first volunteer fire department members. I'm not saying anything about their bravery or their skills, because volunteer or not, running into a burning building, running towards flames is truly badass and brave. And many of those who died in West Texas were first responders. But it's being reported that the first responders actually used water to try to take out the fire at the plant. But apparently there's reports that saying that actually made the problem worse because it was a chemical fire. Why were they using water? Well, because the company lied about the amount of chemicals that were actually in this plant. Local first responders and the community needed to know exactly what the hell was going on in this plant and how many chemicals were there. And the fact of the matter is, they didn't. They didn't because the company didn't report it. Would the first responders have made a wider perimeter? Probably. Would they not have built a school across the street if they knew that this plant very easily could explode and take out, so many blocks? Probably. Would they not have built so many houses near the plant? Probably. But the truth is, we will never know because the plant didn't bother to follow the law. They didn't think they had to follow the law. They didn't think they had to follow the regulations because I don't know, because of freedom, because of America. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about freedom. The freedom for this company to have 1,350 times the amount of explosive chemicals in a place that was not suited to safely store it. So, this happened in Texas, right? This happened in Texas. How many other potential man-made disasters like this one are just out there waiting to happen? Reuters reports that specifically ammonium nitrate and other dangerous chemicals are, quote, found present in at least 6,000 depots and plants in farming states across the country, end quote. Okay, 6,000. How many of those are near schools? How many of those are near nursing homes? How many of those are near apartment buildings, near houses, near towns? We don't know. We don't know. And even more, so let's move on. The media coverage of this was pathetic, to say the least. Now, granted, the Boston Marathon bombing was a major story. That absolutely is no excuse, though, for the lack of national coverage when this Texas story happened. Look, obviously we need reporting of the Boston Marathon, but here's the deal. Did you actually watch any of the, say, 24-hour news network coverage of the Boston Marathon that went on for days afterwards? Most of it was not reporting. Most of it was not like, here is actual news items. Most of it was people sitting around speculating. Talking and speculating and chatting about all the horror, just speculating, and most of the time, incorrectly. Most of the time saying things like, oh, the bomber's a dark-skinned individual, saying the suspect is a Saudi national. Just constant blithering and speculation that just frankly heightens the fear, heightens this tension. Could some of that time spent speculating, could some of those resources have been spent covering a disaster, while again not limiting the tragedy of the Boston attacks? I live in Boston, I went through the attacks, but surely some of the 24-hour nonstop coverage, time, and resources could have been used on the Texas explosion that technically killed more people than died at the Boston Marathon. Pardon me. And what coverage the explosion in West Texas actually did receive was equally pathetic. The coverage itself. So Media Matters actually did a study, and Media Matters found that on CNN there were 24 reports on the explosion, and not one mentioned the company's illegal supply of ammonium nitrate. Not one. And this is after that actually came out. We're not talking about breaking, there's an explosion, blah, blah, blah. No, this is after the fact, after we found out that this company had 1,350 times the amount of this dangerous chemical. 24 reports, not mentioned once. On Fox, they had 24 reports as well, and one mention by a guest, a glancing mention about the amount of chemicals. On MSNBC, 17 reports. One mention as well. Why? Because mainstream media, they do not want to talk about that fact. They don't want to talk about the fact that this was industrial manslaughter. This was death by unregulated capitalism is what went on here. Where is the call? Because if you watch the Boston coverage, it's all about, we have to get the bombers, and we do have to find them. But where is the call to arrest the plant owners who blew up an entire town with their criminal not only negligence, but willfully ignoring the law? I think negligence lets them off way too much. This isn't negligence. They were breaking the law. They were breaking it. And of course, another side of this is that Texas representatives, many of which, including, Senators Ted Cruz, John Cornyn, Congressman Bill Flores, many of which voted against FEMA aid for Hurricane Sandy victims. Of course, those same politicians are calling for FEMA money. Of course, they're calling for federal aid money to help out the town of West Texas. Rick Perry, Texas Governor Rick Perry, who, again, need I remind you, threatened to secede the state of Texas from the union, from the big evil federal government. Rick Perry is asking for federal dollars to deal with this corporate-made disaster. He wants federal money. But, does he want more regulations? Does he want better oversight to stop something like this from happening again? Does he want to put regulations in place? Does he want to put, inspectors in place to make sure something like this ever happens again? Of course he doesn't. Reading from the Dallas Morning News, quote, Governor Rick Perry said Monday that spending more state money on inspections would not have prevented the deadly explosion, which is false and a lie and wrong. He said that he remains comfortable with the state's level of oversight and suggested that most Texas residents agree with him. End quote. Well, maybe polling-wise, that might be true. Maybe most Texas residents agree with him. I imagine the ones who died probably have a different opinion. I imagine the families of the members who died probably have a different opinion. I imagine those who lost their homes due to this corporate Manslaughter might have a different opinion, but I don't know. I'm not going to put words in their mouths. But but we'll talk about Rick Perry himself. Not only is Rick Perry perfectly comfortable with Texas oversight and regulation, but this week at a convention in Illinois, where he was there to try to get Illinois businesses to relocate to Texas, Rick Perry, this is after the explosion here, Rick Perry actually said this, quote, "I have a word of advice for employers frustrated by Illinois' short-sighted approach to business. You need to get out while there's still time. The escape route leads straight to Texas, where limited government, low taxes, and a pro-business environment are creating more jobs than any other state." End quote. That's right, Rick Perry. Texas is a right-wing wet dream. Low taxes, low regulations. In that, Texas is definitely a leader. But Texas also leads the nation by far in fatal workplace accidents. And that's not counting the ones who died last week. But I'm sure, Rick Perry, there's not a connection between no taxes, no regulations. I'm sure there's no connection between that and corporate manslaughter. We'll be right back.